you know, where we should be spending our time, where we should be spending our energy. And he has a very similar look at this. He just refers to the two forms of happiness in a not necessarily happiness, but it's the remembering self versus the experiencing self. And again, you sort of get yourself into that same thing with, you know, are you doing things overall with your life that make you happy? Or are you in each individual moment happy or sad? So if you could kind of like pinpoint an exact moment in your life, what are you feeling and what are you experiencing at that time? That is very much the experiencing self, versus when you know, talk to somebody else and they say like, hey, how have you been doing for the last couple of years? If you catch up with somebody, like, you know, say you went to high school with someone, you know, for me it'd be like 10 to 15 years ago, and talk to them and they're like, oh, what are you doing? And I would say like, oh, I'm doing this, and like that would be your remembering self, or, you know, happy with your life self, where, you know, you have like a lot of satisfaction of what you're doing, or maybe you don't have a lot of satisfaction. The opposite end of the like the mom, the CrossFitter, the businessman, is someone that maybe like sits around, plays video games all day long, eats junk food, works at vacation. And that's kind of the opposite end, where your individual moments are actually fairly enjoyable. If you like playing video games and you spend 5 hours a day playing video games, you're probably happy in your life. You know, if you like eating pizza and you spend every night eating pizza, you're happy in your life. But when you reflect on what you're doing and where you're going and where you've been, you have the opposite feeling, right? That's when you feel less positive. So that's kind of like the two ways of looking at it. And then once you understand that sort of mechanism, from there you want to take that and learn how to use that for you and to make things better. So some people just kind of naturally can do it. They can sort of just dig in and work really hard for a really long time knowing that's the right thing to do. And then other people, myself included, struggle with that a lot. And that's why, you know, some people are just naturally, like at the gym, when things get hard, like they're really good. And, you know, when they have to work long nights, they're really good at it. So one of the things that comes into play is how you frame things. So how you're framing your day-to-day experiences is kind of everything. And we'll get a little bit more into this. But so there's this old proverb, or I don't know exactly what you call it. I think I originally heard it in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast or Slow, and there's a bunch of versions of it. Anyways, so there's two people, right? They're both, you know, this is, you know, hundreds of years ago. They're both stonemasons, and they both building, right? All they do is they you know, they build walls. And one guy, he just goes and he lays stone, and it's grueling work. You know, you're lugging stone and then you lay it and then you finish it. It takes a lot of time, right? They both have the same job, but one guy is very unsatisfied with his life and just doesn't like his work, doesn't like anything. And the other guy absolutely loves it. You know, he thinks it's like the greatest thing ever. But when you ask, and, you know, if you're looking from like a very micro perspective and just kind of looking right at what they're doing the exact same thing, and they should have the same view of it, right? But what actually happens is one guy views himself as building a wall, right? It's just a wall. It doesn't, you know, it's a part of a building. It's not super important. There's millions of walls out there, you know, it's not changing anything. He just builds a wall, and he's been building this wall for years. And he doesn't know if it's going to be finished. He may not even live long enough to see this wall finished, right? And he doesn't care. And the other guy, who's doing the exact same job, but is like completely ecstatic. And when people talk to him, he's so thrilled with his life. They say, what are you building? He's like, I'm building a cathedral, right? It's still a wall, right? But he's building his part of this massive cathedral. And when you ask him, he says, I'm building this thing that's so much bigger and so much greater than I am. And I don't need, like, it may take longer than my life to finish this cathedral, and I probably won't even see the whole thing, but this cathedral is going to last for 1,000 years, and I'm going to be part of building this massive thing, both, you know, size wise and scope and the meaning of it and what it means to the individual. And those two people are, again, in a experiencing self, living the exact same life. You know, they're getting compensated the same way, they're doing the same job, they work the same hours. But if you ask them, one guy is just absolutely thrilled with his life and just raves about how happy he is, and the other guy complains all the time. And I think that's something that we can really take advantage of, is understanding like why you're doing what you're doing, and especially getting yourself into things that you really like the big picture of. So if that's, you know, the cathedral, whatever the cathedral is for you, that you can view it as can make things so much happier. And then another kind of version, sort of like a different version of this, that maybe the modern version that CrossFitters will understand, is if you ask Sandra, for example, because she's on the call, I'm going to throw her out there and she does a lot of these workouts. Sandra did a workout, I think it was like, we do them all the time. It's like assault bike, burpees, and then back on the assault bike. And you're doing this a whole bunch of times, right? And by the end of it, you know, you've worked for say it's like a half an hour long, just suck fest. And at the 31-minute mark, you're finished and you're laying on the ground and everything hurts and you're breathing super hard and you're sweating and you're uncomfortable, but you're so satisfied. One, because there's a relief of it being finished, and two, you accomplished this thing you set out to do. So I'm going to take that. Imagine you had that exact same experience, right? Just the physical stuff though. So you're panting, you're out of breath, you're sweating, but instead of finishing a workout, you just woke up feeling that way, which is basically what it's like when you're sick. So you wake up and you're like, all of a sudden your view of those two things is completely different. And I think everyone here that works out understands that, and they know how to process that. And it's a very like, you know, tangible example of what the experience means to you. So that's something where you can kind of also use, like, we're already using framing that way. You don't need to like tell someone how to frame things that way. They know the difference between waking up in the middle of the night in, you know, covered in sweat, breathing hard, their stomach hurts, maybe they're throwing up, you know, all the same things that could be happening after an assault bike workout are happening there, and they're totally different view of it, right? One, you are so happy, you know, you're like, I'm done. It's going to get better from here on out, versus I just woke up feeling this way. I know this is going to last for several days, maybe several weeks. So just looking at those two experiences, we can kind of see all the difference in the world. Those two moments in time are exactly the same, but how we frame them makes all the difference, right? So that's kind of how you shape what your day-to-day experiences can mean. And then, so I want to go over a couple things that once you have that understanding of that actually can make us happy, right? And what maybe we think is going to help us, what we don't think is going to help us. So the first one I got on the list here, and this one has been studied a bunch of times. It was on Nicole actually sent me some info that I'm going to put out at the end of this, some resources. I think this was from Laurie Santos from the Happiness Lab. Giving versus receiving. This was a study done on basically I think it was like they went up to people on the street and gave them some amount of money, but there was a stipulation with the money. So you gave them, you know, $100, but the thing was, here's $100. You have to spend it today, and you have to spend it on yourself. So they did that, and then the next day they met them and they surveyed them like, how was your day? And then the other group, they gave $100. There's a stipulation. Here's $100. You have to spend it on the end of the day, but you have to spend it on someone else. Overwhelmingly, the people that spent the money on other people were much happier. They look back on themselves saying, hey, this is something that like I felt so good doing, and it made me feel really good. But, you know, generally speaking, we don't think that way. We think like, okay, how am I going to elevate my mood? Okay, I'm going to find things to get there. So she uses the example all the time of, say you're having a really bad day and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go and like do a spa package or something, and then I'm going to make myself feel better that way. But scientifically speaking, like if you actually really wanted to elevate your mood and feel happy and feel better for a longer period of time, you would probably be better off to go give that same thing to someone else, because the feeling you get is so good when you give it to someone else and get them to enjoy it, and then you feel really good about yourself. I think the people that probably have a better understanding of this than anybody else is mothers and, you know, fathers, like just parents in general, where you get so much out of giving your kids gifts and stuff, right? Like Christmas time, I always remember like my mom didn't care what she got. It was always like, you know, giving someone else something and seeing them light up, right? That was always the joy. And it turns out that that's just overall like something that's going to help you out. And the more you can kind of find ways to do that, the better you're going to feel. And especially if it's something like, sometimes it's a small thing that's not going to make much of a difference. So another example somebody said was, and I'm actually trying to figure out how to do this, was they, during quarantine, they were still working, and they reached out and they gave their hairdresser like the normal money that they would have spent. You know, they spend, you know, for me, it's like I spent $30 on a haircut, and I actually gave myself a haircut 2 days ago. but my money's not totally different. So reach out and you could give that person the $30. And if you do something like that, it is this weirdly, insanely satisfying thing to do, right? And it's something where it's like, there's not much more you're going to get out of it happiness-wise if you're looking for like a direct return on your investment, if you're just purely looking for happiness. So looking at things that way can make a huge difference, and just trying to, pay it forward as much as possible and just, give more than you receive, right? Second one. So this one is, I call it like the extrovert advantage. There's another thing that's really big is human contact. And weirdly, so obviously like deep relationships are very important, right? We want to have these like deep bonds, but most people are pretty aware of that. They're aware that they, I want to have these like either romantic relationships, family ties, deep friendships, people that I really, really care about. And they're obviously super important, but everyone kind of has like an equal amount of that in their lives, to some degree, not necessarily divided based on if you're introverted or extroverted. But what is also very important is what they call like fleeting conversations or, interactions with people. So, talking to someone in your Uber, or sitting on a plane next to someone and striking up a conversation. Smiling to somebody walking down the street. Yeah, talking about this today. I was walking down the street. I have to park on the street to walk back to my house, and there was a lady walking down the sidewalk with like a big tub, and she's just moving something from her car into her house. And I saw her, and I walked onto the street to give her the space because during COVID we always try and give each other 6 feet. But I kind of maintained eye contact with her, and she just smiled at me, and like she like melded like thank you. And right away I was like, I feel like, because I was thinking about this, I was probably more dialed in. Like, I feel so good from that. Like that little thing makes you feel so good. And so that's something that's obviously unique to COVID right now. But in general, like the little conversations that you have, the smiling at people, the going out of your way and getting something back in return can be hugely influential in how happy you are in your day-to-day experience. And it is something that seems to be that extroverted people that are willing to like put themselves out there and say hi and strike up a conversation, actually get a lot of happiness out of it. And there's sort of like a lot of people that may be shy or introverted might think that there's too much, you're not breaking it down in your head as like, okay, this is the risk, this is a reward. Like, what if it's awkward, what if it's not? But you're just sort of like, it's not really worth it to me. I'm just going to like look at my phone, or I'm going to like just kind of nod and put my head down. But it actually is something where when people push forward through with it, they find like, oh, I do actually feel quite a bit better. And you sometimes don't even notice it, because some days you're just like, I'm having a good day today and I don't know why. And you talk to one person and like that elevates your mood. So you end up talking to someone else that you maybe wouldn't have talked to. And that happens 3 or 4 times throughout the day. And then by the end of the day, you're like, I had this great day. And they're like, what did you do? I'm like, I didn't do anything different. Like, it was a normal day. But you talk to your Uber driver, you talk to like someone in an elevator, you talk to a cashier, and you talk to a waitress. Something like that can hugely elevate your mood. And it's something where if you're someone who's introverted, really try and push yourself in that area to interact with people more. Obviously right now, this is kind of an awkward time where you can't, go up and shake someone's hand and be like, hey, I'm Rob, like I want to talk to some more people. And, you're at some people can just strike up a conversation and some people struggle with it. But if you're someone that struggles with it, I really recommend trying to push yourself a little bit more and get yourself out there in any ways you can. Obviously during COVID, like it may be like on a Zoom call, and maybe you're like thinking like, should I go on this call? Should I not go on this call? There's going to be a bunch of people. It might be awkward. Maybe it's like the Markham crew and I'm from Woodbridge and I don't really know them super well. Or maybe it's like your husband's family's on the call and you're like, oh, I'm going to sit there, but maybe sit down in it, right? Push yourself a little bit. And most people tend to be, really happy that they did in the long run. And all the things they feared about happening don't really happen. The next one. So this one's obviously like pretty close to home. So community is really, really massive. Feeling part of a community. The most of the research has been done on like religions, organized religions, the major religions, and they found people that are involved in a religious group are more happy than those that aren't. But it doesn't matter what religious group you're part of. So it kind of became, okay, the real thing is community and connecting and going through with things. So, you know, that is a value that I think a lot of people that used to have religion in their lives more, used to go to church all the time. There used to be like very close knit communities because you believed in one similar thing and felt yourself part of this, like basically an extended family, right? I think this is one of that we don't have to spend a ton of time dwelling on because we're all obviously here. We've spent a lot of time talking about community. We know like CrossFit is kind of like, in a lot of ways, it's like a church. You know, you have the general same amount of people depending on the size of a small town church. So you have the same level of relationship to people. You get the connections. You get basically everything everything that the church traditionally offers as far as the community effect goes. And then so that's one that we don't need to spend a lot of time on, because I think most of us that are in here that are already like not just part of the CrossFit community, but like you're dialed in, you're coming in on the 12 o'clock calls to connect with people. But, you know, obviously to other people, if you're giving advice, that should be something that's on that list is, hey, what's your community? You know, maybe some people get it from work, but a lot of people don't, you know, like I look at it through like the gym, like, you know, Chris is on the call right now. Like we have a very like tight community, and like the coaches and stuff all support each other. We're all, you know, there's like 4 of them on this call right now. But there's a lot of work environments that don't have it, that like that's not a huge thing for them. And maybe your time is spent a little differently. I think a lot of it is the fact that like CrossFit works at, you know, your early mornings and late night. So you're forced to become really close with those people, whereas a 9 to 5 you may not be. So just if you find yourself, you know, looking for something to make you happy and you realize, oh, I might need to like invest more in my community, whatever that is. So another one, expectations versus reality. So this is really, really big. A lot of happiness. So the inverse of happiness, which is a much more solid thing to look for, is suffering, right? Suffering is, we want to avoid meaningless suffering as much as possible to get to a happy life. Those two things kind of like go hand in hand. With expectations, both good and bad, the expectation part over the actual experience that you're thinking about tends to be more significant, right? So what I mean by this is, if you look at it from a good thing, let's say a trip, a bunch of studies have shown that planning a trip is more enjoyable than the trip itself in a lot of levels. If you're just checking in about like at each point, when are you the happiest? You're so excited about it. Like it's still building. It can be anything and you want it to be, and you're just so fired up. So the planning of a trip is just a hugely important thing. And it comes with, there's so much joy with it, but then it often leads to a little bit of a letdown when you get to the trip and things, you know, you built it up so much that you can't live up to it. And I think that's why a lot of times random things, like things that happen that without a lot of planning, tend to give you so much joy, because there was no planning, there was no expectation. You just immediately got this insane thing that happened to you. You know, whatever that, you can look at that from a bunch of different ways. But, you know, say you randomly meet someone, say you're on a trip, for example, which is where random things tend to happen more. And you start talking to somebody like, hey, you know what? We rented a boat. Like, we're going to leave in 10 minutes. Like, you want to come out with us on this boat and we're going to go for a cruise, right? That cruise is something that's like, it's going to be such a high point because there's no looking forward to it. Whereas maybe the next year you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to book this cruise and go out on the boat and like do that the next time I go to the same place. And it's not the same because you've built it up so much. So one of the things is limiting your expectations that way and realizing, like, trying to live in the moment as much as you can. If you're always planning for something in the future that's going to be really, really good, then you're probably never going to experience that, right? The inverse of this is also true, though. That's the upside. So a great example is public speaking. Public speaking is the most common fear that everyone has, which is, like, in my opinion, I don't understand. Like, if you give me a chance to talk in front of people, I'm going to take it and then figure out what I'm going to say later. Kind of like this. But with something like public speaking, you're going to say, I tell you, okay, you know what? Let's go, Sandra, you're going to do a big talk tomorrow. I'm picking on you again. This one's not like Sandra at all. I don't think she fears public speaking. But say Sandra's somebody that like really fears public speaking. And I'm like, you know what, Sandra, tomorrow at 8 o'clock at night, you're going to go and there's going to be 250 people here and you're going to give a talk about CrossFit. And she's like, okay. And she's like, maybe she's afraid of it, but I'm like, look, this is part of your job. You have to do it. So she's now signed up for this public speaking event in, you know, 32 hours, right? So she has to go do this event. She's going to spend the next 30 or so hours freaking out about it, right? It's going to build up in her head. She's going to be super nervous. She's probably not going to sleep at all. Everyone has different cues. Some people, get nauseous. Some people get headaches. Some people cry. Whatever it is to you, you're going to have a very uncomfortable experience leading up to this. And then almost all of the time, you go up and you do the thing and it's not as bad or as good as you thought it was going to be. It just sort of happens. And if you were to check in with her at every point, and especially if you were to do like a purely physiological test on her of when she experienced the most physical and like emotional discomfort, it would not be on the stage when she got out there. It would be before it. This is also pretty similar to like when you hear almost all athletes say, I'm really nervous up until, the puck drops, the bell goes, like 3, 2, 1 starts in CrossFit. They do the jump ball in basketball, whatever it is. Everyone's nervous until it starts, and then it starts and they know it's gone. But the thing is, at least with athletes, they've done it so many times, they see it coming. Whereas if you're someone that's afraid of public speaking, you haven't done a lot of public speaking, so you're not aware that once it starts, the nerves are going to go away, right? And that's something where you just got to dial it in a little bit and be like, okay, what I need to do is limit my expectations and reel it in and realize, one, being like suffering right now is not useful. It's not helping me get better at it. And just realize it's never going to be as bad as you think it's going to be, or it's never going to be as good as you think it's going to be when you build something up. An interesting study showed that a lot of people, I think it was Laurie Santos again, was talking about young, like I guess it'd be high school kids applying to school. And when they got the card, like they got accepted to Yale or Harvard or Princeton or whatever it was, almost all of them described it as, if not the happiest day of their life, one of the top 3 happiest days of their life. And that moment itself was so huge and so significant. But the thing that no one tells you about is a huge percentage of them, the next day was one of the least happy days of their life, because they accomplished this thing and they thought everything was going to be different. They thought the world was going to change. I'm going to be somebody else. Everyone's going to look at me differently. And it didn't. And they didn't know how to react to that. So it's one of those things where when you have something that's really, really good and you built it up so much to these unrealistic levels, either good or bad, just remember it's going to come a little bit short of that. It's going to be less bad. It's going to be less good. Just try and live in the moment, be realistic about your expectations, and try and be happy during those moments, right? So that's sort of like the expectations versus reality side of things. One more is just a quick one. I think a lot of people who have looked into this at all have seen the big one that gets pointed out. Experiences over things. So barring the earlier conversation about like giving something to someone else, if you do want to give something to yourself, what is going to make you happiest? So you kind of look at it as like, do I want to spend a lot of money? Say I'm going to spend $1,000 on something, right? My 2 options are, I'm either going to buy myself a really nice watch, or I'm going to go away for a weekend on some kind of a trip. Pretty much the research says you should always go on the trip. You're always going to get more happiness out of it. The happiness is going to last longer, even though the trip ends and you would instead of having a watch for the rest of your life, you would just have a memory of a trip. That memory is going to provide more happiness than the watch would. So if you ever find yourself in those situations, even if you think the thing might last longer, the happiness associated with it, all of the studies show that experiences are better than objects or things. One last one before we kind of open this up is, so if anyone has heard I think the number gets changed a lot, right? There's the $70,000 a year number, 77, there's a bunch of different numbers, right? So I think people have heard this number thrown around, and basically it's also hugely important to adjust for inflation and what city you live in. But there's a certain number where if you make this much money a year, you can't get any happier from making more money. So this has been thrown around a lot. Basically, it's a half truth. So there is some level of truth to it. And that's where we go back to the experiencing self versus the remembering self, or the in my life versus with my life. So as far as happiness in your life goes, your day-to-day happiness, there is a ceiling, and it's a pretty low ceiling. So in a city like Toronto, it might be, you know, a couple needs to make, you know, between $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Like, it might be a pretty high sounding ceiling, but once you get there, your day-to-day life actually doesn't get any better. Having more things doesn't make it better. Getting, you know, having a bigger pool, a bigger house, a faster car, it doesn't make your day-to-day life any better. However, there is no ceiling on how your satisfaction of your life can be affected by your income. So there is some truth to it. You're not going to be, like, Tuesday morning next week, you're not going to be happier that you drive like an Audi instead of driving a Toyota. But when you're telling people about your life, or when you're thinking about who you are as a person, the car can help. So it's just one of those things where if you view yourself as someone who's very motivated by how they view themselves, then lean more towards that and try and go for these bigger, more life satisfying things. Whereas if you're someone who's actually probably a little bit more dialed in, and you just want to spend the most amount of your life being the happiest as possible, which is actually a fairly reasonable kind of algorithm to run, then it would make more sense to, once you get to a certain income level, to start diversifying, start finding other ways of pursuing happiness, because you do get very diminished results after the higher end of things. But again, it's always one of those things. It's like a problem that I want to encounter at some point, right? I want to find myself at that point where I have to, like, reel it back and get happiness from other things. So that's, like, the main stuff that I've got so far. I've got some resources that I'll mention at the end if anyone's interested, and that's mostly from Nicole. I'm going to open this up to Nicole, if you don't mind, and see if there's anything that you want to mention, you want to add on, push back on, any thoughts you have?
Actually, you did a great job. And I was, in preparation of you doing this to me, I was writing some notes about what I would want to address. So with the income level, the reason why that defines you essentially is because of the crowd that you keep, and that your happiness often depends on comparing yourself to other people. So Laurie Santos will often refer to, if you want to get happier fast, it's social media, because now you're just seeing the highlights of everybody else's life and not the reality of it. And so, and she'll even talk to her students saying, after you make $75,000, you don't need to go for a better job, just close down your Facebook. Like, that's what she says in her courses a lot. So that was the only piece that I picked up on that was different.
Yeah, and that's a really good one. And I think it's something where, yeah, you have to decide, like, what it is that you want, right? You know, where it's going to be. And it's something that falls into the expectations versus reality of, once I make $80,000, then I'll be happy. Once I make this, then I'll be happy. You know, there's this list of things of, like, when I've, you know, or the other term is always, like, when I made it, you know, when I'm there. And it's a very short-lived feeling, and then you're, like, back after it again, and you're chasing that. Either you're chasing that high, or you didn't get that high, and you're like, okay, I was wrong, because of how fast our expectations grow. And I mean, this can be true of anything. You talk to, like, CrossFitters are in a lot of ways the freaking worst for this. You go and you're sitting there and talking to somebody, and they're like, if I could just be like, Anita's not really on this call, but I kind of want to throw Anita under the bus here, where it's like, if I could just be, like, a little bit better at toes to bar, or a little bit better at this, and I'm like, Anita, look what you've done in the last 2 years. And it's like, there do need to be, like, see some of that, right? And be like, be fired up, be excited about it, because, you know, going from 10 toes to bar unbroken to 15 toes to bar unbroken is not going to make you insanely different, right? You're not going to be a different person. And it's just appreciating the grind of getting there is way more important. And Chris has talked about that before, and other things, where if you're not happy fighting for it, then you're not going to be happy when you've got it. But if you love it, like, if you're someone like Sandra, and, you know, Anita obviously loves training because she spends more time, like twice as much time as I do on it, then you're not going to, you may even get there. Like, that's the thing, is some people will get there, but you're going to get there and immediately you're going to be like, oh, I don't feel any different, right? Maybe you qualify for a competition. You're like, if your goal is I want to finish top 100 in the open, and you come 97th, you're like, great, I did it. What do I do next year, right? So just looking at things that way, it just, expectations versus reality, and living in the moment are two big things. Chris, you look like you got something to say.
I think you want me to say something is what I think is what you want.
Well, you started paying attention to us, so.
Sorry. You know what? Honestly, it's a big balance, to be honest with you. Like, as human beings, like, our sole purpose in life, in us as species, is to evolve, right? So if we were always complacent and being like, I'm just happy where I am and I don't want to move forward, I don't think we would be happy. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, we want the next thing, you know, but I think it's learning how to, you know, like, someone told me, like, try to be, like, live blissfully and happy, right? So you're being blissful with, you know, the day to day, because, you know, you have to, if you don't appreciate anything that you're in right now, like, your life is always going to be shit. You're never going to be happy, and you're never going to, you know, live in the present moment. You're always going to be thinking about, you know, when I get to this point, I'm going to be happier. And we all know, like, as soon as we get those goals, like, as soon as you PR, you're like, okay, but now I got to PR on this, or, you know, I'm happy I did this, but I need to get to, you know, from 290 pounds to 300 pounds, right? So again, it's just natural in us that we always want to get better. It's just that balance of just being like, I'm appreciating where I've gone, like taking the time to take a step back and be like, yeah, I realized that I went from here to here, I'm better. You got to not compare yourself to anyone. Be happy where you are at the present moment, and always want to get better, because, again, just like working out, if we try to stay the same in working out, we'll probably end up actually not staying the same. We'll probably eventually just get worse and worse and worse. Right? So we need to keep pressing to move forward, but it's just finding how to balance out that happiness of, you know, being present and knowing that it's okay to be happy where I am, and be happy knowing that I want to get to that next level too, instead of being like, okay, I suck right now. Give me another year. I'll be better here. I'll be better when I do this. Because that's something I do struggle with from time to time, because I'm never really happy where I am, because I keep thinking so far ahead. But sometimes, you know, having to stop and remind myself, be like, look what we have, look what we've got, you know, taking this second just to be appreciative of the things that we have, right? And you know, from time to time, I gotta remind myself that. So it's I don't want to say a struggle, but it's something that, you know, that I think it's natural, right? It's kind of hard, because I do know some people who, like, they've stopped growing for years. They've stopped, and I've seen it in them, and it drives me nuts. And like, they're happy, but I'm like, are they happy? Maybe they could be happier. They just realize that they're living here, and there's the whole nother level of happiness that, if they worked a little harder, if they had a little bit more motivation, if they had a little bit more work ethic or drive, that there is another level of happiness that they could get. And it's not like that. It's just a self-fulfillment, and knowing that you're in control of yourself, I think, is really what it is, right? It's not the dollar amount. It's the excuse to get there. You know what I mean? To be like, I was able to achieve my goal. It's not the actual, like, you want to make $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. It's like, no, I did everything I needed to do to get to my goal. I think that's what's important.
Yeah. And I also, like, really finding out, like, getting to know yourself is so important there, and dialing in exactly what it is that you're chasing too, because that's really important. And I think, so I'm going to use the example of, a bunch of people have said this about Tiger Woods, and I think Tiger Woods is one of the most interesting athletes of all time. But a guy was interviewing him, and he was saying, like, this other guy was also a golfer, and he did really well. He won a few tournaments. He won a few $1 million. But he always said, you know, I always played golf because I was really good at it, and I knew I could accomplish things. I could make money. And he's like, and I partied, and, like, I loved winning a tournament, going out there. And he says, that's what made me, like, a really, really good golfer. But Tiger was different. Tiger really wanted to be on the back nine at a major with everything on the line. So, like, right when it came down to it, like, when he was competing, like, that's where he wanted to be. He didn't necessarily, like, he loved winning, but he really just wanted to win so he could get a chance to be in another opportunity to try and win again. And he wasn't happy. Like, he was still happy when he won, and it was very gratifying, but he would tell you he was way happier on the 17th hole, standing over that shot, knowing how tough it was going to be, and, like, looking at another guy and being like, I'm going to beat you, or you're going to beat me, than he was, you know, later that night drinking and celebrating. It was in that moment that he was so happy. And that's why he was impossible to beat, because no one else could understand that. No one else could grasp that he wanted to be there more than anyone else did. And I think you see that, you know, CrossFit's a really good one as well, because CrossFit involves a lot of discomfort, right? And sometimes you could just tell the difference between the guys that want to be there to do well and show up and stuff versus the guys that are like, I just want to be here. I don't care where it is. Like, I just want to compete. I love competing. I need to compete. And that's why I'm here. So if you're aware of why you're in what you're in and whatever it is, that's really important versus thinking that some like random thing in the future is going to make you happy. That's wrong. Whereas if you're like chasing this goal is what's going to make me happy. You know, it's climbing Everest versus being on the top. You're never going to feel that good at the top. But if you can like love the suffering of climbing the mountain, then there's real happiness there, right? And that's all the difference in the world. Again, you're back to framing it, right? I love chasing things or I love getting the thing. And if you love chasing it, I think the world is very optimistic and positive. You always get there. But if you love getting the thing, it's never going to be as big as you want it to be. So you have to love the journey and the quest, right?
So just to recap on that. So do you think it's the people who love, like, again, Tiger likes being at the 17th hole and knowing that all the pressure's on him. Do you think it's because opposed to like people who are like, oh, I just want to win the trophy right away. They want to win it, but they don't have the experience and understand the true work ethic and what it takes to be a champion, where they're like, I just want the end result because I don't know about the in-between, or I haven't done enough to really truly understand the in-between, where people who have been at the top so many times, they know that the meat and potatoes is the journey, right? And the more that they're in that time, like on their way to winning, they've been there before and understand, like, I'm in full control because I know I'm in control of every single step to get to my goal. Kind of like, you know, keeping it in a simple term of like when we try to teach the snatch, where people smash it off their hips and then just hopefully they catch it, but they don't understand that the goal or the person who can snatch the best understands every single degree of that bar path is in, and they're in just as much control pulling an inch off the ground, then 2 inches, then 3 inches, all the way to catching to the receiving position. Instead of just like, oh, I just hope I can snatch.
Yeah, I think so again, a lot of it comes down to like how you're framing it and what you look at. So to like look at the opposite example, like there's amazingly great athletes and successful people that do things conventionally wrong. Like I'm pretty sure Matt Frazier has said when he retires, he's just going to stop doing CrossFit because it's so uncomfortable. And he's obviously like a champion of champions. Whereas Froning has said he's never going to stop till the day he dies. So you have two very different perspectives on two insanely successful people that are looking at things differently, but they're framing it in a way that they enjoy. And that's kind of where it comes down to. But you're always going to see the person, like you're going to get to the highest level by being happy chasing because you're going to hit a lot of success along the way. Right. And if every time you hit a success to, you know, say you go back to golf, like you don't like start golfing and then win a tournament that's like on the PGA Tour. And then you're like, well, this wasn't what I thought. Like you win several things along the way. And basically at some point you realize it wasn't worth it to some people, right? You could, because everyone has so much potential, but you know, you win a tournament when you're 9 years old with your little friends and you're like, okay, great, I won. I didn't feel that good. Or maybe you did and you win. And then you get to college and you're like, you've won a tournament and you're like, you know what? I won this tournament, but like my buddies that were out partying with girls were having more fun than me. So you lose a lot of people there. And then in the real life happens. You're like, well, I got a family. Like, you know, I'm 28 years old. I've never won anything before. And I'm not seeing my kids at all because I'm chasing this dream and I'm going to quit. So there's all these levels where you can quit. And I think most of the people that love doing what they do are the ones that like, that also goes hand in hand with how you get there, right? I mean, you can look at it the same way. It's like you made regionals when you were young, like when you were younger, when it was like, that was the stepping stone. And a lot of people made regionals and were like, you know what? Like, this wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to make regionals and feel so happy. And then I didn't, versus other people had the same experience, but at the games. And some people had it during the open. So it's kind of like what level you're at, but you have to keep pushing through that. Like I'm doing this because I love competing, not because I love winning whatever it is. If that makes any sense. Sorry, that was a little bit rambling there. Anyone else have any comments here? Like Sandra, you're notably quiet.
I'll pull a Rob. Sandra, I think you really look like you want to discuss something.
Yeah.
I just don't hold back. We're all friends here. It's okay.
I'm a pretty happy person, so I don't know. I'm just listening in, agreeing. Like, yeah, I'm a happy person. So happy you guys, Chris, crazy.
Yeah, there's the weird
always
dynamic
working out
of other people's happiness bringing you down. When you find yourself in that situation, you should also be very cautious. That's generally not a good sign. As I'm speaking to you here, Chris, when other people's happiness makes you unhappy, you know, that's true. That's some red flags there where you're like, oh man, if Sandra's in a worse mood today, I'd be happier. Then I'd be all like spunky and fired up.
You know what? As long as I beat her in every workout, then I'll be happy. I don't care if she's happy or sad. If I beat her in the workouts, I'll be happy. I've been unhappy for a long time.
All right. Well, yeah, super happy. Everything's fixed. So I do have a couple of resources. This is actually mostly Nicole sent it to me. I think I'm getting this right. So there's a couple of courses, and I guess you could take these online. And they're the Science of Happiness and Foundations of Happiness in the Workplace. Nicole, you want to like jump in and say how that would work?
Yeah, so using a platform or an app called edX, you can register in those two courses. They're free. They're operated by the University of California at Berkeley, and they're done at your own pace. They're super interesting. Then there's Laurie Santos's course, which is on a different platform called Coursera. And that is the, what is it? Do you have it there?
I'm not sure what, so I know her podcast. Yeah. She also has a podcast called The Happiness Lab. I don't know if it's the same name as the course, but the Happiness Lab has got a ton of resources. She's super good. She's really interesting. Like when you listen to her talk, it's really good. And she combines like how we emotionally feel, putting it with logic, which is very difficult to do. You know, like we don't think of connecting like math and logic and reason with like trying to be happy with our lives. But if you spend a little bit of time and energy on it, you kind of get that feedback. And she was on a podcast called Making Sense with Sam Harris, which was kind of like what sparked this for me. And there's a few other things, like there's the Waking Up app and Headspace, which I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about, but they're all like mindfulness apps. And those are also really useful too. I didn't want to get too much into mindfulness and meditation just because I think that's worth like a whole other call at some point that either I or someone else can do. But those are also, you know, well proven to be closely associated with happiness in your life as you kind of like learn how to frame things a little bit better. All right, so I think that's probably it for today. Thanks you guys for listening to some of this rambling on, and hopefully like a little bit of good information in there as well. And then thanks to Nicole, Sandra, and Anita for all being good sports and letting me pick on them.
Thanks for coming out, guys. Thanks, Rob, for putting it on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye.